Welcome to Mystic Life Podcast. Before I even finished posting the last podcast, I already had come up with some new ideas for a second podcast, and that's what I'm going to go over today. First of all, one of the things that really freaked me out the most was the bit about JFK's assassination, how his limo was different. I recall him driving in a four-seater limo, and the governor of Texas was sitting in the passenger seat next to the driver. There was no second woman in the limo, that, as I recall. So I had called my mother to tell her about this Mandela Effect stuff, and I told her about the limo, the JFK's limo. Well, I asked her, I said, do you remember what kind of car he was in? You know, was it a stretch limousine, or was it just like a smaller, just regular four-seater? She said it was a four-seater. And I said, nope, it was a stretch limousine. And man, she went through the roof. She said, she had some explicit language there and said it was not. I remember it was a four-seater. And evidently something I didn't know is that a friend of my grandmother, her mother, was actually one of the photographers that were there. She said, and the guy had told them that when Kennedy was shot, and you see Jackie crawling over the trunk, the guy had told my grandmother and my mother that she was yelling, "Get me the hell out of this car." She wasn't trying to help the Secret Service man get into the car. And that's how close he was when he was he was photographing the visit or whatever. And she said that she knows it was a regular four-seater car. It was not a stretch limousine. And now I also find it curious. I mean, I don't know a heck of a lot about this. He was killed before I was born. But I remember seeing the footage on the news, and then there was a lot of discussion and different documentaries about the assassination and conspiracy theories. So I saw it a lot when I was young, but I wasn't there and alive when it happened. But one of the things I find interesting is that when I was trying to find pictures of, to see if there was some kind of what they call residue of the four-seater car. So I was Googling for photos, and I come across this one photo where the limo looked like it was torn apart. So I, looked at that image, and it turned out to be photos of the limousine as it was being built in the Ford plant. And this was in 1961. And what I find curious is that there's photos of him arriving in Fort Worth and in Dallas before the actual shooting. I guess he was in Dallas the night before he was actually killed, or the afternoon or whatever. But there was pictures of him driving through the streets in a regular four-seater Lincoln, like what I remember him being in. And I've run across many of those pictures, and I said, oh, there it is, and I pulled it up, and I was like, well, that's not it. That's when he actually got there, when he was driving from the airport to his hotel or wherever he was staying. Those are the pictures. Now, if he had a stretch limo, why wasn't he in that? Why was it the only time the only pictures I can find of him in that limousine is at the shooting? Any other time you find pictures of him, he's in the regular four-seater Continental, like most of us Mandela people remember. I find that very curious that the only time he's in that stretch limo is during the shooting. And he was in Fort Worth, and then he went to Dallas. So he was in two different places there. And there's pictures of him in both cities in a regular four-seater Lincoln. The only time he's in that stretch is when he's going through Dealey Plaza. I find that curious. On to my next Mandela Effect is Sally Fields. I asked my mom. This is things I asked my mom too. Well, some of it anyway. I asked my mom about, I said, I asked her about Forrest Gump. And she remembers life is like a box of chocolates. Just like a lot of us out here do. Mandela people anyway, I guess. And so I told her about that. Then I asked her, I said, do you remember the woman that played his mother? And she said, Sally Fields. So, again, somebody else who says Sally Fields with an S. And then the other thing about Sally Fields is there's quite a few things with Sally Fields. First of all, there's Forrest Gump. There's a connection there between Forrest Gump, or between her and Tom Hanks and Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks also, there's a thing about Apollo 13. Now, I've looked it up, and evidently it's the way I remember it, but I saw some people talking. There had been some previous posts where it had been changed to, Houston, we've had a problem, and then it changed back again. There are people that say they remember it going from being the right way to the wrong way and then back to the right way again. I only saw it the way I always remember it, so I can't speak to that. However, Sally Fields and Tom Hanks were both in Forrest Gump, which there's also an issue, about life is like a box of chocolates versus life was like a box of chocolates. Well, the other thing is that Tom Hanks, Sally Fields' brother, is one of the scientists that work at CERN. And the leading theory out there is that CERN is actually responsible for these changes, regardless of how, that everyone thinks it has something to do with that particle collider out there. And so Sally Fields' brother is a scientist out there. She's visited out there. I don't know if it's recently, but she has been out there and she saw the collider. She describes it on Letterman. Now, when she's 70 or 72 or whatever, she was on Letterman and she was talking about, actually, it must have been a while ago because Letterman was still hosting. So, but she had talked about that. But she was an old woman at the time. She wasn't when she was younger. So it was within the past, since Letterman, right around the time Letterman retired or whatever. And she talked about being out at CERN and visiting her brother and seeing everything. Well, I ran across some photos of Tom Hanks visiting CERN. So these two people who swear, I guess Tom Hanks swore in the past when people were asking about all of this that it was always, Houston, we've had a problem, and now it's back to being we have a problem. But anyway, in the Forrest Gump thing. So, and Sally Fields says her name was never Sally Fields with an S. It was always Sally Field, So these two are part of the Mandela Effect, and both of them swear that it's the correct way. And then, as I spoke about in the first episode, the last episode there, when you talk about Luke, I am your father, well, James Earl Jones remembers Luke, I am your father, not no, I am your father. And he wasn't at CERN. So I don't know if there's anything there, but I found that interesting too. But the other thing about Sally Fields is that when she accepted her Oscar, she said, I'm going to tell you what she said. And then what she supposedly said now. When she won the Oscar, she said, you like me. You really, really like me. Now it's, you like me right now. You like me. She never said that. Now, Sally Fields has been on Letterman when she was young, which I'm assuming was before she visited CERN. Now, the reason I think she visited CERN or didn't visit CERN was because I think they would have mentioned it, in the later interview when she was 70 or whatever she was. They brought it up, or Letterman brought it up as if it was something recent. So I don't think that she had visited CERN when she did the first interview. And when she did the first interview, she actually said, they like me, they really like me, and everyone laughed because everyone knew what she was talking about. She was joking about what she had said at the Oscars. So that right there is what they call residue of the way it used to be. At least for us. I'll get into some of that later in this show or maybe in another show. Anyway, now on to, let's see. I've got notes because I tend to ramble, so I've got notes to follow this time. The Ford logo has a little curly Q on the line in the middle of the F, has a pigtail. That was never there. I used to work on Fords all the time. I used to be a shade tree mechanic, worked on them all the time. Ford never had that little curly Q on it. And I've actually run across a man who has photographed, actually I've run across many photographs of the Ford logo the way it used to be. And yet Ford says it was never like that. So if it was never like that, how can there be photographs of, I guess they're going to assume that people have photoshopped all this stuff. But I recall it, and somebody photoshopped it evidently exactly the way it is in my memory. I don't think so. Now, there's also a book, and onto another one here, that's just reinforcing that Mandela died back in the late 80s. There's a book in South Africa that talks, it's more of it seems like it's a governmental book. That's the way it comes off to me. But it's a book down there that lists Mandela's death in 1991, which is later than I remember, but it's close to the late 80s, and I was busy. In any case, he died back then. It lists Mandela's death in 1991 as the reason for the peace accord in South Africa. So there's some more Mandela Effect residue about Mandela himself. Now I'm going to bring this up. I don't know, because I didn't personally see this Mandela Effect, but I've seen people talking about it. And it kind of goes along with that, the Tom Hanks visit to CERN and stuff. And anyway, Apollo 13. Evidently, at some point, I remember him saying, "Houston, we have a problem. We have a problem." Then there's all kinds of chatter on the internet about it had been changed to "Houston, we had a problem," past tense, which doesn't make sense in the movie. And supposedly, that's actually what the astronauts said at the time, which still doesn't make sense. Why would he say we had a problem when they're jumping through their butts trying to fix because it's going on at the time? It doesn't make sense. So that in itself may be another Mandela effect that nobody's caught on to, or nobody had information or hadn't heard it themselves, that kind of thing. Anyway, and supposedly it's jumped back and forth. It went from we have a problem to we had a problem, and then back to we have a problem. So I guess we should be looking for the astronauts to say, no, we said we have a problem, to see if what they said actually jumps back to. But doesn't make sense, past tense, we had a problem, when that problem lasted through the rest of their trip, actually. The next one is, I ran across something about the Portrait of Dorian Gray, which is the name of a book written by Oscar Wilde. And I'd heard about this before in the past, just in passing. I didn't read Oscar Wilde. I don't know anything about it myself. But I have looked it up, and it does. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because it doesn't make sense. Oscar Wilde is a famous writer. The man was educated. He wrote novels. He knew how to use language to get across his point. That's what makes a great writer. And for him to use the what I recall and what other people recall is that it was called The Portrait of Dorian Gray. Well, evidently now the book is called The Picture of Dorian Gray, which makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, yes, a picture is a picture and a portrait is a picture, but a picture is not a portrait. There's a difference between a portrait and a picture. And it's a subtle difference, but especially back then, there was a bigger difference. You can think of the word picture as being more of a vernacular term, more of a slang word for an image, whether it be painted, sketched, taken with a camera, whatever. That's more of a slang word. A portrait is a very specific type of image. A portrait is an accurate representation of a specific person or family, I guess it could, because people did family portraits. But the portrait it's more like, if you listen to the police describe a suspect, say, white male, 30s, 6 feet tall, that kind of thing. That would be kind of like using the word picture. And then a portrait would be like a psychological profile of that person. That's the difference between a picture and a portrait. A portrait, the background, the clothes they wear, everything is thought out to make the portrait, the final product, be as accurate a representation of who that person is as you could possibly get. So everything was meticulously done. When somebody did a portrait, everything was very meticulous. I mean, if you look at the portraits of the presidents in the White House, they're just amazing. You know, they're not just photos. Even portraits taken with cameras, they're more amazing than just pictures. Like when you see the president out walking from the airfield or something, it's a whole different story. You know, you could say a picture like, I'm sure people have seen pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger out on the beach where he's looking all flabby and stuff. And then you see pictures of him where he's all dressed up in a suit. Well, that's the difference between a picture and a portrait. You know, a picture can be anything. It's just the person's in there. You can tell it's them, that kind of thing. A portrait is a very specific thing. So for Oscar Wilde to use the word picture in that particular book, because that book is about how the man himself is changing over time, and he's seeing it represented in a portrait before, and then it happens to him. Now, I'm sure this is a whole psychological thing. It's not really happening to him because I've never seen the movie or read the book, but I've seen little bits of it, you know, when I was researching this. But the point is that the theme of the story is that as the portrait changes, so does he. And the portrait is a representation of who he is. You wouldn't use the word picture for that. You would use the word portrait. It doesn't make sense to use the word picture. And I looked up the etymology of the word portrait. And it goes all the way back. They're kind of roughly, or the word picture rather, because I know portraits always been used. Portraits way back in the like 300s or something, and then like the first century, and then the picture didn't come out until the 15th century. So I mean, the word was around when he wrote the book, but I really doubt that he used that word because it's such a general term, whereas portrait's a very specific term. And if you look in the movie, the 1955 movie called The 7-Year Itch, the character, I don't know who the character is, but the character is talking to, I think it's not Jack Lemmon. Who's the other guy? I forget his name. But he's talking to him about the portrait of, there was the opportunity to buy a first print of the Portrait of Dorian Gray. And he says the portrait, not the picture. And he was talking about a first print of a book, which is, I guess, is rare, and it was worth money because they were talking about they could, make a lot of money off of it and stuff. So I don't think that he would have inaccurately said the name of the book. I mean, that wouldn't make sense. And he said portrait, not picture. There's another Mandela effect that I saw out there, and it blows my mind because everybody knows that this is not the way it happened. In Tiananmen Square in China, there was a protest, and there was a man that stood in front of the tanks that were coming up whatever road it was. And in my time or reality or whatever, I actually think it's more of an alternate reality than an alternate timeline, but which I guess there's a fine line between the two. But in my reality, my former reality, I guess, because this is mine now, that guy in Tiananmen Square got run over by the tanks. He was killed. He was mangled. He was squished. He was killed. Now, in this reality, he wasn't. The tank stopped. I remember this being a big issue that the Chinese were so overbearing about their population, and they were so ruthless. And I actually think that there were some human rights sanctions or human rights sanctions put on them by the United States because of it. I can't swear to that, but it seems to me that something like that happened, that this was a big deal. This was a global big deal. Everybody in the world was up in arms about the fact that China ran this man over, or the tank driver run the guy over. He was ordered to keep going, so he ran the guy over. Big deal. And now in this reality, they don't. They stop. He's the one guy standing out there with a bag of groceries or something, wouldn't move, and they wouldn't, run him over. They stopped. Didn't happen in my reality or my timeline. He got killed. Big deal. It was a really big deal. And that's a mind blower. Okay, another Mandela effect here is Ezekiel in the Bible, Ezekiel 23:20. That's like reading penthouse letters or whatever, if that exists now. I should look that up to see if that exists now. But letters to the penthouse forum or whatever the heck it was, I honestly never read them. You would think I would have, but I never did. But actually, I read a couple. My friends, I think, and me got together and read them when I was like a teenager or something, but I didn't read them, religiously like some people do. But these things, it's the Ezekiel 23:20. It reads like a pornographic. It's a description. It's a pornographic description. He talks about how this girl was a prostitute, and she was longing for the men in Egypt. I guess she was a prostitute in Egypt because they had really big members, and when they were finished, there was a lot of volume to their issue, and it talks about that, and that's a lie. Why would that be in the Bible? It's very descriptive of that, and I've read the Bible myself front to back 3 times, and I don't remember that being in the Bible. I don't remember it not being in the Bible, but you can't really prove a negative anyway. But that's the kind of thing that would have stopped me in my tracks when I was reading the Bible. I would have said, what is this? And that never happened. I think that they're onto something. There are some people out there who say that they know this wasn't in the Bible before. And now when I read through the Bible, I actually highlighted and underlined. Every time I read it, I used a different color highlighter, or sometimes, actually I think I read it 4 times, but the 4th time wasn't front to back. I read most of it, almost. I think it was Numbers. It's Numbers or Kings or something, or Numbers and Kings that I skipped over because it's a lot of just rambling. But every time I went through it, I either used a different color highlighter or I underlined stuff with a pen. In this Ezekiel, I actually, when I turn to pages, I can see that I underlined a lot of stuff before it and a lot of stuff after it, but there's not a single underline on where this appears in the Bible, which also makes me wonder. It's possible I just didn't find anything worth underlining in there, but it's also possible that it was a changed part of the Bible, a part of the Bible that changed since. How do you even think about that? Since I underlined it? I don't know. But that when I was underlining, I did not see that. That's my takeaway from it, because I think that would have stopped me in my tracks when I was reading it. Also in the Bible is the Lord's Prayer, Matthew 6:9. The Lord's Prayer, as I was taught, and, well, yeah, I guess I'll just say as I was taught, because I remember reciting it, was, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, actually, there's another part where it says, let's see, the Lord is powerful on earth as it is in heaven. When I said it, it was on earth as it is in heaven. Now it says in earth as it is in heaven. I don't remember it ever being that way. I remember it being on earth as it is in heaven, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just remembering that wrong. Nobody else has noticed that or brought it up. So maybe it was always that, and I just always said it wrong. But the part where it says, forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. Yeah, that was always like that. Now it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. which is in, I think it's Mark. But Matthew always said trespasses, and Mark said debts and debtors. So there were two different ways of saying it between Matthew and Mark. Well, now Matthew says debts and debtors just like Mark. So that's changed. And the other thing I want to bring up is Ed McMann and Publishers Clearinghouse. I know the man was a spokesperson for Publishers Clearinghouse, and you can actually find residue online about newspapers and news people talking about him being the spokesperson for Publishers Clearinghouse. Now, the explanation, supposedly, is that he was a spokesperson for American Family Publishers, which is very similar to Publishers Clearinghouse. And that's the argument that everyone has, that no, he never worked for American or Publishers Clearinghouse. He was always with American Publishers. You're just confusing the two. I specifically remember that my mom used to do the Publishers Clearinghouse thing all the time. I know Ed McMann was in Publishers Clearinghouse, and he was the guy who went to the door, handed him the check, because I specifically remember one day seeing a commercial where he was doing American Family Publishers. I remember it both ways. And I remember seeing that commercial and going, what? I guess Ed McMann started his own thing. I thought that he had moved from Publishers Clearinghouse to American Family Publishers because either, he was an investor in it or something like that, that he decided to leave Publishers Clearinghouse and start up with these new people. I remember specifically thinking that when I saw that commercial the first time. So I remember both ways. He did do it for both of them in my reality. And I always thought that he jumped ship from Publishers Clearinghouse because he was offered more money, or maybe he was an investor, or he was given stock or something like that. But there was some reason why, or they just stole him. I don't know. I also remember Johnny Carson bringing up him being on Publishers Clearinghouse on at least one show, because when he was still Johnny Carson's sidekick, they used to, banter back and forth. Well, some of that banter every now and then, well, at least the one time I can remember, he brought up Publishers Clearinghouse to Ed McMann. And Ed McMann seemed to be kind of like, it was almost like he didn't want him to bring it up on the show. And that's why Johnny Carson brought it up, because he knew it made him squirm. But I remember it both ways. And that brings me to, I guess, the end of the show here, where I'm going to talk about remembering it both ways. I remember several things both ways. I know there was other things, and I should have wrote them down for my notes here, and I forgot. But there was a couple of different things that I ran across as far as Mandela effects that I actually remember both ways. And I think now it's not like the Ed McMann thing where I remembered it transitioning from one to the other. There were situations where I could actually remember it both ways simultaneously, which is pretty freaky. One example of that is in Back to the Future, the van that the terrorists were driving. When I saw the video, the guy put up a picture of the van that was used in Back to the Future. And I was like, yeah, of course. I remember that van. And then he put up a picture of the Volkswagen van. And all of a sudden, I could remember that too. I can remember them using both of those vans. I can actually vividly remember both of those vans being used in that film. And when I saw that and realized that I was remembering it both ways, I couldn't believe it. I was like, no, maybe it's just a power of suggestion here. So I started thinking back, and no, I can remember. Now the Volkswagen van, I have more of a vivid memory of it when it pulls up to dock and they shoot him. I can literally remember that being that little that Volkswagen, that old Volkswagen van. However, when Marty runs into that 1 hour photo little booth that used to be in parking lots, when the van runs into that, I can specifically remember that being the other van. And I'm going to have to actually look at the movie. Maybe it does change in the movie. I hadn't even thought of that. It's possible that because the timeline changed, it went from Twin Pines to Lone Pine. So maybe they actually went, when before he left, they were driving one van, and when they got back, they were driving the other van. I should look that up and find out. But there were a couple other things that was similar too, that I could remember it being both ways. And the Ed McMann thing, I thought, well, maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm remembering that both ways. But no, I can specifically remember seeing that American Family Publishers commercial and thinking, oh, Ed McMahon's not with Publishers Clearinghouse anymore. I remember that. And that was a long time ago, folks. That was back in probably the late 70s, early 80s that I remember seeing that. Or it might have been mid 80s. I don't know. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was when I was young, like late teens, early 20s, that I remember seeing that and saying, oh, Ed McMahon's not with them anymore. You know, he's gone on to this new thing. So, and around that time, my mom stopped doing Publishers Clearinghouse too. Oh, I wonder if that's a Mandela effect in itself. I should ask her if she remembers doing it, because she used to do it religiously. She would get upset if she couldn't get that Publishers Clearinghouse in. Anyway, so that's pretty much the end of the show. We're only going 30 minutes. If you want to be on the show, if you have a story to tell, I would be really interested to hear how this has affected your lives. And if you just want to get it off your chest, go ahead and send me an email, and at mystic@beastmodepops.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing it on the screen right now. And the blog is mysticlife.beastmodepops.com. And make sure you like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. But of course, as always, you're free to do whatever you want to do. And until next time, y'all take it easy.
We lose ourselves in the spirit of things. We lose our sight when we put our trust in things of this material world, of things that fade away. Yet we keep coming back, 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 of things we know. Spirit of things, we lose our sight when we put our trust in things of this material world, the things that fade